We are live.
Good afternoon. I'm Shanika Smith, the Chair of Equity and Engagement Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all to our March 16th remote meeting. All council committee members and staff are participating virtually. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live from our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have the option for the public to listen live by phone. To call in live by phone, call the number 855-925-2801, meeting code 2689. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, the speakers will push *3 to enter the speaker queue. I'll now go through and introduce our committee members and staff who are participating virtually. We also have special guests here with us today, and they'll be introduced to our live audience later on in our meeting. Just say a quick hello, staff and committee members. Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good afternoon.
Director of Communication and Public Engagement, Dawa Hitch.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Director of the Office of Equity and Inclusion, Brenda Mills.
Good afternoon.
Deputy City Attorney, John Maddox.
Hello, everyone.
Community Engagement Manager, Christina Israel.
Hi, good afternoon.
Interim Assistant Director of Community and Economic Development, Frank McGowan.
Good afternoon.
All right. And Sage is unable to attend today's meeting. So we'll move on to the first part of the agenda and we'll go over, I'll make a motion to approve the last meeting's minutes.
Second.
All right, I'll do a roll call vote. Kim?
Aye.
And myself, aye. The motion carries. Our agenda is going to be just a little bit different than what's posted on the website. We have special guests today, so we're going to allow our guests to go first. We're going to start with the disparity study update. I'll kick it to Frank McGowan, and he'll introduce his guests.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank McGowan, and I'm the Interim Assistant Director in Community and Economic Development. With us today, we have Miller 3 Consulting, the firm that has been hired to perform the disparity study for the city of Asheville. Next slide, please, Katie. So I want to start with some key takeaways. The city is legally required to conduct a disparity study to extend the existing race and gender conscious contracting and purchasing policy. The city has engaged a consultant, Miller 3 Consulting, to conduct the required disparity study. Miller 3 kicked off that project and we are at the midpoint and we are on track to complete the study as scheduled. Draft recommendations will be presented to council members in October with action required to extend the current Asheville business inclusion policy based upon the findings of the most recent disparity study. And at this time, I would like to introduce Dave Miller, Jr., who is the CEO and project manager for Asheville's disparity study, as well as Mr. Larry Scott, who is the assistant project manager. And at this point, I will turn it over to them.
Good afternoon, and Frank, thank you for that introduction. To the Equity and Engagement Committee members, thank you for allowing us to take a moment and share the disparity study effort. And so we are pleased to be with you today to provide that update. Next slide. Before you is an outline of this afternoon's brief presentation. I will provide an overview of the firm, the team assembled to conduct the disparity study, as well as share an orientation of what exactly a disparity study is, its goals and objectives. Next slide. A little bit more about who we are. Military Consulting is a second-generation, nationally recognized management consulting firm headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Next slide, please. The firm's founder, Dave Miller Sr., is considered the pioneer of MWBE programs, having served as the City of Atlanta's purchasing and real estate director under then Mayor Maynard Jackson. And for nearly 35 years now, we have focused on providing excellence in advisory services to our public and private sector clients. We conducted the very first disparity study in 1989, where we correctly anticipated the direction of the courts in the landmark City of Richmond v. Croson decision, which I will speak more about later on. We have extensive experience operating in the Fourth Circuit, as some of our past clients are presented here. Next slide. Our project team brings unparalleled experience to this effort. We have an average of 23 years of experience in inclusive procurement, contract compliance, and diversity and inclusion space. As Frank mentioned, today with me is Larry Scott, who you will hear from to talk about the timeline. Mr. Scott is serving as our project manager for this effort. Next slide. We also take pride in ourselves being a catalyst for economic development, and we do this in conducting disparity studies by utilizing local sub-consultants. And so for this effort, we have two North Carolina-based hub consulting firms supporting us in executing quantitative and qualitative tasks in True Point Solutions, as well as M&V Consulting and Contracts. And you can see the areas, data collection, as well as race neutral and anecdotal analysis support are the areas for which they are assisting us in this engagement. Next slide, please. So now we'll provide a brief orientation of a disparity study, what a disparity study is, why do you conduct disparity studies, and what essentially does a disparity study measure. Next slide. In short, a disparity study is a research study. It is a type that is designed to assess whether there are disparities or differences in participation rates. Factors that are considered in conducting this analysis are race, ethnicity, and gender. It involves executing a methodology that has both qualitative and quantitative components. The goal of the disparity study is really to identify those barriers that may be preventing a more open, fair, transparent, fiscally responsible procurement environment. They're often used in the public sector, primarily in contracting and procurement. Overall, they provide valuable insight into the organization's health as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And lastly, it really identifies opportunity areas for advancement of current efforts and progress made to achieve milestones related for which this body is intimately involved with. Next slide. So why do you conduct a disparity study? As Frank mentioned, it is necessitated in part by the Richmond v. Croson decision. That decision established a two-pronged test for municipalities who are considering race-conscious initiatives. The first prong of that two-pronged test is to establish a compelling governmental interest. You establish that interest through a factual predicate. The factual predicate is another name for a disparity study. And the second prong of that test is to tailor any found inferences of discrimination to those who are affected and impacted. Additionally, it is a means to identify discrimination against those impacted bodies. And then lastly, which is to underscore Frank's point at the outset, it is a legal defensible means to establish or retain preference programs as it relates to contracting. I will note that it is one tool in the city's tool belt. The work in this committee is a direct impact on the economic development of underserved communities, but with policy improvements, adequate oversight, performance, and testing of any impacts of recommendations. All those are tools in your tool belt. We also recognize that once the city has achieved parity and there is no longer any inference of discrimination, there's a sunset provision that states that you can then move to race neutral initiatives because you have remedied those past identified areas of where inference of discrimination was found. Next slide, please. So, what is a disparity study measure? In short, the analysis requires both quantitative and qualitative components, which are highlighted here. The quantitative analysis helps us understand past performance and charts trends. The qualitative analysis helps us to better understand the environment and any policy-related impacts and gives us insights into the perceptions and experiences of businesses who are attempting to do business with the city of Asheville. And we do this through executing our 10-part methodology. Next slide, please. The methodology includes an industry analysis, which takes into account your legal environment, what is permissible. Inside of that analysis, we assess both local and statewide laws as it relates to MWBE programs. Secondarily, the procurement analysis evaluates policy and, most importantly, the practices of those making the buy decision. The statistical analysis helps us to understand your relevant market. We determine the relevant market for each procurement type. We classify your procurement types into 5 broad areas: construction, architectural engineering, services, professional services, non-professional services, and your traditional goods and supplies. And then we take the measures found from RWA availability and compare the proportion of those firms who are utilized against the proportion of available to compute the disparity ratio. The next sort of 3 tasks in our methodology are related to your market analysis. And this is where we are engaging the community to understand their perceptions and experiences. We evaluate race neutral providers and management and technical assistance providers to determine how their output is creating an outcomes and making minority and women-owned businesses more commercially viable in the marketplace. This comprehensive 10-part methodology leads us to customized conclusions and recommendations for which we will bring back to Asheville City Council and possibly to this committee for considerations. Next slide. I now will turn the presentation over to the project manager for this effort, Larry Scott, to talk a little bit more about our progress as it relates to the timeline. Larry?
All right, thank you so much, Dave. Great afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Larry Scott. I serve as a senior consultant with Miller 3 Consulting as part of the Learned team that Dave represented earlier in his narrative. My particular focus for this engagement is around the review and analysis of your written policies and procedures, along with interfacing with identified staff members to see if day-to-day practices are in alignment with your written policies and procedures. Upon being engaged for this opportunity, we mapped out the 10-part methodology that Dave just detailed, placed it into our Gantt chart, and it kind of identified the 12-month type timeline that is represented. If I could get the next slide, please. Is the next slide showing?
It is showing.
Okay, I'm having an issue here. But the slide identifies the timeline by which all of the individual tasks are mapped out. As you can see on the represented slide, there are tasks that occur concurrently, and the average throughput of the individual task is around 90 days. If I would have done a better job on that timeline, I would have included a straight black line that kind of shows you where we are in May. Frank has identified that we are about halfway through the engagement. And the intent is, as we continue the individual tasks associated with the execution of this important work, we will be providing drafts in a regular cadence for your jurisdiction to review and react to as we drive toward the final presentations. Next slide, please. And so before I turn the floor back over to Frank for him to give the balance of his narrative, I'd like to pause here for any reaction to the overview that Dave delivered and the timeline that we just discussed at a high level, being mindful of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Miller and Mr. Scott. Committee, do you have any questions?
I just appreciate the work and look forward to revisiting the outcomes of what your findings are.
Thank you. And same here, this is exciting. I'm not sure when the first disparity study was complete, but I know it shifted a lot in conversations and our programming in the city. One question that I have, you said that you will be able to release drafts before the final report is done. Is there any way that when those drafts are complete, that maybe there can be a report to this committee?
I believe so. We have been in discussions with Frank around at what point we release. Typically, we make sure that our clients are aware of those findings before we come out into a public setting. And so I think it is fair to say, Frank, I'll look for some confirmation here, that we will revisit the timing for which we will come back to this committee.
Yes, and I can speak to that further. Thank you, Dave. Just to wrap us up, the next slide is up, and I'm going to get to the timeline in a moment. But I just want to mention that this project team, it's a cross-departmental effort. I'm leading that effort, but I've got assistance from various departments and divisions across the city of Asheville. I'm sorry, I see a hand.
I can wait till you're finished.
Okay. Next slide, Katie. And the project schedule, jumping down to the study completion date, is targeted in around August. We'll have a draft final report due to the city in September, near the end of September. We are intending to have presentations to this committee as well as council in October. And probably the most important date that you'll see is that city council votes on whether to extend the ABI policy based on the recommendations of this most recent study on October 24th. Our current policy sunsets, absent an extension, it will sunset on November 1st, 2023. Councilmember Baroni, your question?
So last night after the Community Reparations Commission, one of the conversations that seemed to be lingering was the Stop the Harm audit and also economic development impact. And I just wondered, with the audit that we're currently doing and that subcommittee or IFA's group of work, is there any intention to touch base to see if there's any crossover or data points that could be useful to the IFA?
I believe we will need to see what the results of the disparity study are before we can really react to those. So we're looking forward to the draft recommendations, and we will see what those recommendations are. Certainly the intent is to use these findings to determine whether or not, or determine the extension of the current policy, and then we can see what other recommendations are needed to address in the interest of the IFA.
And the second thing that's been coming up before the Reparations Commission, but also in some of the legacy neighborhoods, was the impact of contracting when we do things like road repair or parks and rec facility. I'm thinking of paving specifically. So will this by any chance touch on when we have a mutual agreement or MOU with NCDOT, let's just say like the Merriman Avenue repaving, or if there was a complete street initiative and we were going to be involved in a mutual contracting, will this touch on that at all as far as the city's responsibility?
What we will be looking at is the city's contracting and purchasing activities. It really is not looking at the activities of NCDOT or other areas where we're collaborating. It's really looking at just what the city's purchasing and contracting activities are.
Okay, so that helps add to my next question. When we come back and we see a recommendation, is it possible to get a picture of what percentage of the contracts we have? So for example, if we're not looking at where we contract with DOT or we contract with the county or we contract with other groups in the region, let's say TDA, for example, and we are only looking at the city's contracts, could we get an understanding of what percentage of our total contracts we're actually having looked at?
Dave, I'm going to look to you to assist me here, but I believe the answer to the question is we are really only looking at commercial activity. We're not looking at MOUs and agreements with governmental or quasi-governmental agencies.
That is correct, Frank. I think, Councilmember Roney, what we can do is if there is documented utilization measures, we can consider those as we're developing recommendations as a sort of proxy, if you will, of overall utilization in the marketplace.
I think that would help our community understand, for example, let's say that we're looking at essentially what is 90% of our total contracts versus if it was only 30%. It might help us to tell the whole story if we knew how many times the city defers to, well, that's not really our jurisdiction, even if we're in partnership. So I guess I'm looking for, in general, this may be like a deeper dive on the staff level and take a little bit of time, but like what percent of the contracts we're actually having you look at?
Yeah, I think what we can do is share of your total pie, what percent of that we have deemed as commercially viable. And those things that are non-commercially viable could include those intergovernmental agreements, those things to your nonprofit sector, whether or not you're supporting your local YMCAs or that sort of thing. And so that is a bifurcation that we can do as a direct byproduct of the disparity study.
Okay, thanks. And then if anything comes up that's kind of in that avenue, if we have a way to touch base before we get to a draft, it might help to inform different questions. For example, we just recently had a conversation about rebuilding a park. And in that conversation, we had different parts of the county and the city schools had jurisdiction over certain areas. So for example, would the rebuilding of that park fall under this or not? So it would help if we knew which pool of contracts we're pointing folks to if they come to us and ask questions. And we might be able to better inform the study so those questions don't come at the end if we have an opportunity to look at them through this process.
Understood.
All right,
Katie, next slide.
I'm sorry, Frank.
No, quite all right. The key takeaways, just to recap, the city is legally required to conduct a disparity study in order to extend the existing race and gender conscious contracting and purchasing policy. We're at the midpoint. We are scheduled to complete the study as scheduled. And as I mentioned, draft recommendations will be presented to council members in October with the action required to extend the current ABI policy. Are there any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. And I apologize for badgering your name. I know your name. I don't know why I said it differently when I read it, but thank you, Miller Consulting. Thank you all for assisting our city. And look forward to seeing your final draft. I'm going to go on to the next point of our agenda, and that is an update from Ms. Brenda Mills.
Thank you very much, Councilwomen, staff, and guests. We're going to talk a little bit about the update from our reparations meeting yesterday evening, as well as just a little information. I want to kind of key you up on a little information about the impact focus groups, who they are and what they're doing. And then we look forward in future meetings to bringing them here to talk with you more about the work that they're doing. Next slide. Thank you, Katie. So key takeaways as we get started. So you're going to hear the Community Reparations Commission, or the CRC. They heard updates on several key items last night: the education and health and wellness impact focus areas. The CRC members were provided an update. Well, actually, let me take that back. We did not get to the point of updating them about the audit scope of work, but it was provided to them around with the timeline. So we're looking at that. The responses coming in June the 8th. An update on the data request and research took a lot of conversation and information last night. And then CRC retreat discussion, we had a little bit of discussion around that. We're planning on that. And then I want to talk a little bit about the status of work by the IFAs. Next slide, Ms. Katie. So education and health and wellness, as I said, gave their updates last night. I do know health and wellness and education have the bulk of the data requests that we're still working on. A lot of the data requests, no, about half or more of the data requests are research level. So they can't just be pulled from somewhere and provided. We are very grateful to the county for adding full-time temporary staff to special collections with Kate Cutshaw. That person will be online soon, and they will start that research project. So as a part of that, we're asking for a moratorium, just temporarily, about 30 to 60 days, to catch up on that research, to pull that data. Some of that they've got to travel for out of Raleigh. We gave them a really good overview of where data lives and what we have access to. So we are working on that. We did not talk a lot about the scope of work, but I'd love to update you on, we're still looking at spring and summer for the evaluation and selection. We're looking at around the first week of July, choosing a vendor for this scope of work, fall and winter, finalizing the audit, reviewing and prioritizing recommendations. Now that all depends on what the vendor says will be the timeline. So we're going to be working with the vendor on that. And we will continue to do monthly updates with the Community Reparations Committee. Next slide. So when we talked about the data updates, the two departments that we have working on that, and I want to give them a lot of kudos, is strategy and innovation with the county and the city's Office of Data and Performance. All staff, most of their staff was there last night, along with Kate Cutshaw from Special Collections with the Buncombe County Library. They took a lot of questions around the data. A little bit of the, I think, communication that we're trying to really, match up is that I think what happens is they're asking for a lot of data, but we're not sure what harm they're trying to redress. So we're going back out. The data and performance teams are going out, as well as Kate Cutshaw. I attend the meetings. We're trying to get a little bit more communication around the data you're asking for. What is the harm you're trying to redress? So we're going to give them what we have immediately. The other we will provide through research. We're hoping in the next 30 to 45 days. And then the retreat, we're looking at a Saturday for that. I think most of our folks work, so it's very difficult for them to be off for, we're thinking at least 4 to 6 hours. So we're working on a date for that. So we'll be hearing more about that soon. Next slide. So impact focus areas. So they're divided into smaller work groups to develop specific strategies around the impact focus areas. There's 5: criminal justice, economic development, education, housing, and health and wellness. Each member was to, there's a member from the commission based on, how they rated their interest in these impact focus areas. We have subject matter experts from the city and county. Want to give great kudos to our staff, the county staff. They are well behind these folks helping, with this information and running these meetings. And then our larger community, our larger city and county team, as well as our community, we're bringing in folks locally to speak to them. For example, we brought in the sheriff and the chief to talk with the criminal justice folks. In health and wellness, we've had different folks. Dr. Norio Armstrong, who came on board in March as the chief equity and human rights officer, has been helping Ginger Clow out of Department of Health and Human Services with our health and wellness group. They're really bringing in local experts, and we're piping in folks virtually. We can do that now to really talk to them about initiatives that are going on across the country. Next slide. So here are your 5 impact focus area groups and their meeting times. Basically, they're working on the disparities in each of these areas. Most of them meet, a couple of them meet twice a month. That will go on until probably at least July or August, as they're starting to form recommendations. We do have a process for recommendations. They come up with the recommendations that they are considering most pertinent in their areas. And then the project manager and the IFA facilitators, who are local folks, keep this in one document. And then there's a form which which the council people will affectionately know is looks like a staff report. So we give information on, what is the title of this harm or recommendation? What are we trying to redress? What is the data around that? Is there any cost around that? So they try to provide as much as they can so that we're looking at, if there's still need more data, it is obvious to us what data they need. So these are our 5 areas. Katie, next slide. So we're looking at how recommendations are made. So we're really looking at, how do you prioritize based on feasibility and community impact? So just a reminder that the impact is not personal to an individual or to a certain group. It is for Black Asheville in totality, as well as it needs to be feasible. Now, we know in the areas of health and wellness and education, we don't have a lot of authority there. So we are working with the school systems. We are working with our medical folks to kind of see, what are feasible. They also work with our legal team as well. So that would be Michael Frew with the county and Brad Branham here with the city. So feasibility is based on whether the recommendation, whether it's a policy, project, or a program, can be implemented or legally supported. So legal has been really, really good in helping them understand language. We've been doing some research around language that we've heard across the country, because we know that there will be some level of pushback on some of these recommendations. They should be fairly broad, as I mentioned, and they do not serve a private interest, but they're meant to impact the greater Black community in Asheville and in Buncombe County. And then the recommendations have to address our 5 impact areas. Next slide, Ms. Katie. So, like I said, we had several updates from them. I'm really sad we did not get to talk with them much about the audit scope of work, but we definitely heard from education, health and wellness. And I will tell you that each meeting, hearing from the IFAs, has really energized our team, our Community Reparations Commission members. This has been a long process for them, and we still got another 11 months to go. So I think, just having them work in those individual groups has really energized them. We had an update on the data request, as I said, from our strategy and innovation and our Office of Data and Performance team. And then we discussed a little bit around the retreat. We'll be looking at a Saturday date in the next couple of months. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the status of our IFAs. So I'll take any questions you may have, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to give you this update.
So the moratorium was put in place so you all can get up to date with the data request.
Because you can be well aware that when the data folks go, we get more data requests. So we're really trying to catch up with those research. And we're still looking at the data that doesn't require research. So a lot of that's going to be fulfilled in the next 2 weeks or so. And then anything that's research, we've already, we're working off a smart sheet. I do need to tell you that. And all of this, all the requests, everything that we've been asked for will be saved for posterity. So we will know what that is. They also were provided a dashboard so they can go in and look. Each of the commission members can go in and look and see where we are with the projects. So, yeah.
And Any idea when you'll resume taking data requests? If you
I
said-
don't want to say and get in trouble.
Okay.
So let's just say we'll look at it in the next 30 to 45 days. So in July, we'll give them an update on where we are. We will give them an update each month, but we will definitely let them know by July.
Got it. Councilwoman Roney?
Let's see. So some of the things that I took away from being in the meeting last night was there is a new full-time employee that's starting on this next Monday, the 22nd.
Mhm.
And the way that I was understanding it is that full-time employee already has experience in data collection, so they're going to be able to hit the ground running, and that they'll be through the special collections staffing, right?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
I think that was encouraging, and I also heard concern about the capacity and the data request cap on June 15th. But at the same time, I did hear the data collection staff speaking to the intention to touch base with each impact focus area before then.
Yes, ma'am.
Another thing that I heard was there are efforts to cross-pollinate between the IFA groups to gain understanding of where their work intersects or overlaps and opportunities to collaborate. And it seemed like that was coming from the education IFA. Do we know if they're just showing up to the regularly scheduled meetings, or are they being asked to show up to more meetings than the ones that are already scheduled?
Education is making an effort to reach out to other IFAs. They all want to cross-pollinate, so that's part of what the retreat is. The retreat will be a year look back. Where have we come from? Where are we now? What do we need to do? And it will also give us time for those IFAs to give a more broader look at their work, not just 15 minutes, and then look at where they're already in their IFAs now, impact focus areas now, looking at here are the 3 or 4 recommendations we feel cross over to education, criminal justice, or whatever. So they're looking at that now. They're doing that pre-work now. That's great. Yes.
Okay. And
Yes,
then
yes.
what I did hear is it seemed like staff was a support staff, especially from the data collection side, was hearing that if it is possible to get caught up on some of the data requests and reopen that's certainly on the table. And
Absolutely. We haven't closed. So let's not use shut down and close. We said moratorium, which means we're just going to leave it in abeyance for about 30 to 45 days. But we have to catch up, because if we don't, we're never going to get the research stuff that's been needed for them. The other thing is having conversation around, do you still need these data requests? Because some things were given a while back, and we still need to know, are these still relevant? Have we understood what you need so that you can, make your recommendations? I will say education is not waiting for data. They are already working on their recommendations. They're just literally sliding the data in as they get it. So we've got folks working very hard on this. We actually have some stuff that is going to be added to our spreadsheet in the next few weeks. So, and we keep them updated as we go along. That's the project manager's job. Also, we keep our impact focus area facilitators updated as well.
I did hear that the dashboard, which it seems like could be useful not just for today's work at this moment, but future bodies of work, while they're, for example, digitizing documents. Is it possible for that dashboard to be either like for the city and the county staff and elected bodies and or public facing at some point?
I don't see why not. All of this work is public work. And so at this point, we just wanted to make sure our IFA commission members could see what was being done, what the progress was. Now, they can't manipulate stuff. So we're still trying to keep that kind of close so that we can keep up with what we're doing. But I don't see why not in the future.
And then the last thing I'll just say is that sometimes in these meetings, because it's such a large table and a short period of time, that you don't always get to hear everyone's voice. But I really appreciated at the end of the meeting that the co-chair went around and heard everyone's voice. It was the first time that I had gotten a chance to make sure that every single person was heard, even if they passed. And so I felt like that was a really great way to end the meeting.
Our chair, Dr. Mullen, had to do this by himself. Our vice chair could not be there last night. So that is at every meeting, at the bottom end of every meeting, if we can get to it. If we're too far after 8 o'clock, generally folks are ready to go home, but we try very hard to do that. So thank you very much for being there. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Brenda Mills. I appreciate you. All right, we'll move on to the next part of our agenda. Did somebody raise their hand? I just heard it. Okay. Dawa's going to go over our national community survey, and then she'll also talk about the neighborhood matching grants update.
Okay, good afternoon, committee members. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you today. My name's Dawa Hitch, and I have the pleasure of serving as the city's Communication and Public Engagement Director. Today, I'm going to give an update on a survey that the city has done over the last 10 plus years on about a 3-year schedule, and that's the National Community Survey. Next slide. All right, a few key takeaways. The National Community Survey was formerly named the National Citizen Survey. Just so everybody knows, we're talking about the same thing, but there was a very intentional name change there to acknowledge, I'm guessing, that our communities are made up of both citizens and non-citizens. So that National Community Survey provides a community livability report, which is a pretty digestible format that takes the survey results and packages it so that we can get a good idea of what the general livability of our city is as it relates to our resident opinion. So in addition to that report, we've got cross-tabular data from a representative sample of residents of Asheville, which allows us to look at demographic information and see where there might be differences in responses based on different demographics. The survey results also provide benchmark comparisons with other cities, and they also follow Asheville trends over time. Our survey results inform the budget process and operational priorities in organizational and departmental work plans. And finally, today staff will be requesting committee guidance on the opportunity for some open-ended questions within the survey. Next slide. All right, a little bit of the history. I mentioned that we've done this every few years for a period of time. The first time the city contracted with Polco to do this survey was in 2008. It was done again in 2015, 2018, and 2020. So here we are in 2023, ready to launch hopefully this fall, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. So the survey is available in English and Spanish, as well as Russian. And the topic areas, the areas that the survey seeks to understand as it relates to our community's perception of the livability of Asheville, are there in that table. I won't read them all, but just a few. Safety is really, there's time and energy spent on safety, health and wellness, inclusivity and engagement, and education. I thought it was interesting coming after the Equity and the Reparations Commission meeting, thinking about their impact focus areas and just knowing that this survey touches a number of those areas. Councilmember Roney.
I guess I'm surprised that housing isn't on here. Or
There
does it
are-
show somewhere in a different bucket?
There are questions that in the past have related to affordability. And certainly we can, if the committee's interested, I can get a full list of the benchmark standard questions that are being asked. And at the end of this, if there are questions related to housing or affordability that you all would like to be included as an open-ended question, there's that opportunity as well. All righty. So next slide. Thank you for that question. The methodology, I'll run through this really quick unless anybody has any questions. I know some folks don't find this very interesting. I find it fascinating, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have. But regarding validity of this survey, it does have a 95% confidence interval, and then the margin of error is plus or minus 5 around any given percent that's reported for all respondents. And that's really important to note that is around. If we're looking at our demographic information, the cross-tabular data, we may not always have such a high or such a low margin of error, and just wanted to be very transparent about that. But it's noted in the report that we get from Polco. So a little more, 1,200 mailed printed surveys go out. They've got return envelopes. And then here, in the last few years, as technology has become more and more available to more people, they are also sending out postcards with an invitation to complete the survey online. And additionally, this one's interesting. We've heard in the past that folks are sometimes concerned that their voices aren't heard if they weren't part of the sample for the survey. And so what Polco has done is created this opportunity for all community members, anybody, to fill out the online survey. And so that's there, it's captured. It's memorialized, and then we can always look to the actual sampled survey to make sure that we've got a good representative sample as a foundation. Next slide. All right, the national benchmarking. It does include cities like Cary, Chapel Hill, Durham, Greenville, High Point, and Raleigh. Those are some of the cities in North Carolina. But again, it does cover cities across the United States. This survey has been endorsed by ICMA, the International City Managers Association, and there's typically a lot of buy-in for different cities across the country to participate. We also have the opportunity and have taken this opportunity in the past to really benchmark against other cities that are similar to Asheville. So that's an option that we've had where we can look at tourism-based economies and see if our satisfaction rates, how they stack up against cities that have the same type of economic drivers that we have. So some examples that are in that particular custom benchmark are Aspen, Clearwater, Sevierville, Tennessee, Virginia Beach, Virginia. There's a number of them. Next slide. All right, so one of the great benefits of this survey is that it's just another tool that the city has to be transparent about the services that we are providing and the way that we are connecting with and serving our community. So I just dropped this slide in here to make sure that everybody knows that the results of the survey are posted online, and you can get there by just going to you could put in National Community Survey in the search bar, but also if you just wanted to go to the Communication and Public Engagement webpage and under Transparency, then you'll find the list of all of our previous surveys. Next slide. All right, so in addition to transparency, it's also an opportunity for continuous improvement. And here again are the different ways that the survey results are used to inform city operations. One, certainly through our engagement strategies. There are a number of questions in the survey about engagement. It also informs the budget process, departmental work plans, and organizational work plans. Next slide. The tentative timeline for this is we're hoping to finalize the survey material by August, get the surveys mailed out by September. Polco works to get the responses in and then do more pushes if we're not reaching the numbers that we need to reach to have a proper sample. And then data collection ends in October. And then they take from October until December to finalize the report, with the report coming in December so that it's there and available as we work through the FY25 budget process. Next slide. All right, so here's the questions we have for the committee. If you all have some direction about whether or not to, again, use this particular custom question. And that is, we've asked people to please indicate how important, if at all, each of the following investments are. And so, Councilmember Roney, here's one of those areas where we've very specifically been able in the past to capture affordable housing, for example. And you can see there in the blue box the other items that were included in that. And so, if there's anything that you would like to see included, or maybe if there's something that's not as important this year, we do have an option in these particular questions to edit what we're asking. All right, next slide. The next custom question, this was one that we only asked in 2018. And I will note that that was before we had our Living Asheville plan, our comprehensive plan. So back in 2018, we said in planning future development, how important, if at all, are each of the following to the city of Asheville's identity and character? And you can see those choices there to the right. Next slide. Then now we're moving into the special topic questions that are available. And one that we've asked since 2008 is, what do you think is the single biggest issue facing Asheville over the next 3 to 5 years? So we've got the opportunity, of course, to ask that one again, if you all think that's a good idea. I do, in the second one, just want to frame this as another benefit of the National Community Survey, and that is because it is statistically significant, our police department and other departments are often able to use the results from that for their accreditation requirements. And so this question was related to APD's accreditation, and we've been able to ask that question through this survey as well. That being any suggestions or recommendations for improved police services. The third one, this related to short-term rentals. If you want to think back to 2018, that was a really big question facing our community, and there were lots of different opinions about it. So we used this opportunity at that time to get some input from the community on the ordinance and to what extent people supported or opposed the ordinance. So those are just some examples of how special topics can be tailored to where we are right now as a community. Next slide. So the next steps, staff will take any input that we've received today and draft questions to bring back to the committee for final approval this summer. And then there are survey materials. We anticipate that we need to get the survey materials back to POLCO in August so that we can follow that timeline of having results in as we are launching the budget process. Next slide. And again, just some key takeaways. We get a report from this survey. We get cross-tabular data where we can look and see if different demographic groups respond differently to different questions. We have benchmark comparisons where we can compare against other cities, and we can also look at how our ratings are trending over time. Those survey results inform both the budget process, departmental work plans, and operational priorities, as well as our engagement strategies. And staff is here today to give this update and capture any initial feedback or input you all would like considered as we move forward with the survey. And that concludes not the survey. That doesn't conclude the survey. that concludes this presentation. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilwoman Roney, do you have any questions? I don't have any questions. I'm good.
Okay, first of all, thank you. I started sketching some preliminary thoughts, and I'll send them to you, Dawa, if that's helpful, and to Rachel so that y'all can maybe marinate and see where other council members might have some ideas. But I'd be curious to know if it's common for our other North Carolina benchmark cities to add to the survey, and if so, what they are adding. So for example, if there's a common thread question about housing or about land use or infrastructure, like is it common, and if so, what is most commonly added? Do we have a sense of that right now?
We do have a sense, and it's been really great to work with them on this because they've been doing it for so long. They've got so many connections. So I can recall when we were working on our short term in 2018, when we were working on the short term rental ordinance, they definitely worked on that language with us, looking at what other cities had been, how they had been framing that question, and then of course making sure that our questions don't have any bias or anything. So we do through the consultation that they do with us in the development of those questions, we do have that resource.
I would love to see that, because that might just help me understand like the process they go through. If you have like a document that you've used in the past or something, I'm not trying to make a lot of extra work, because I actually have some other bigger ideas here. For example, is there anything that could be added here that might fill gaps in our understanding or dig in a little bit deeper than maybe the census does? For example, we could ask if someone is a renter or a homeowner, but more importantly, we might be able to ask like what percentage of the household income is spent on housing? Or could that go alongside of what does affordable housing mean to you? Because if we do have a chance to add open-ended questions and there is a common thread across North Carolina, it might give us a chance to understand where we need to fill in some gaps of education and what we're doing to meet the public expectation.
Yeah, I do. That is absolutely something that we can look into, and we can dig into it a little bit more with the consultant that we work with to prepare. Because I will say the way it has worked in the past is they haven't necessarily given us the questions from other cities, but they've said we've looked at what we've done. We've got a number of cities that have asked this question, and kind of here's where we landed on it. But we can certainly ask just, what information do you all have that we can share with our council to see what's happening citywide or across the state or the country, whatever level you all are interested in. And then those open-ended questions absolutely create an opportunity for creative solutions or creative, maybe creative approaches to how some of those really complex challenges like affordable housing can be dealt. And then we can get a better understanding, I think, with an open-ended question. As you said, just what does that mean to you, which would be a little bit harder to ask through a series question or a multiple choice kind of question. And then I will say that rent or own is definitely one of the demographics that is considered. So we do have cross-tabular data on rent own. Again, depending on how many people responded to that question, sometimes, the margin of error might be a little bit larger, but at least we've got something to go on and or go back and do a little bit more research or intentional outreach to see if that is indeed what our community, if it's representative of our community.
In a similar vein, I was curious, like if we're trying to get a picture of what are folks' concerns in the next 5 years, what would it look like to have a question around does someone in your household participate in youth or after school programming, either as a participant, a parent or guardian, a volunteer or employee? That might give us a bigger picture. And then on a totally different, maybe parallel track, is the county participating in this?
This survey, so no, this survey is just within the city limits. It's only sent to households that are within the city limits. Now, we do share our results because it is a comprehensive, it's a snapshot of our residents' perception of Asheville's livability. And it does have questions like that, questions about education, satisfaction with education or health and wellness, things that are outside of the city's core service delivery.
Okay, so since the county's not involved, we might have to think about this one, but I wonder what it looks like to break out public safety a little bit. So both as a chance to educate, but also gain feedback on our new and expanding or growing services. Like, since the last time we've done the survey, we've added some areas around homelessness response, opioid and substance use crisis, violence interrupter programming, I think would fall more into the county, but our community responder program. So if folks don't know that we're doing new things around public safety response, I don't want us to miss the opportunity because we asked a broad question instead of maybe like having a chance to break that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we could do is we could put together, based on the input that we've received today, we could put together information that shows what kinds of questions are already in those stock benchmarked questions, and then what some opportunities for some open-ended or special topic questions could be to speak to those items that you raised.
Right. So I'm just imagining if someone's like, we have to do something around public safety. I'm specifically concerned about our unhoused or housing insecure neighbors. And then we missed the opportunity to let folks know that we were doing things. I have just found a lot of times if I go to a neighborhood meeting, for example, folks didn't know about the community paramedicine program to the county or that we were piloting a community responder program parallel. So I just didn't want us to miss that opportunity. So I'll just send you the sketch that I have. And thank you so much for the opportunity to bounce some ideas in real time with you.
Yes, very much appreciate that. And certainly I think you sparked an idea. There is a message from the mayor that goes out with the with the survey. So I think that could be a great place where maybe we could point people towards our annual report if they're interested in some of the services that are being provided. So I appreciate that feedback.
Great, thanks.
Are we asking other council members to to give feedback?
So that is, yes, Rachel, did you want to jump in? It's certainly an option. It was a question that was raised.
So we'll definitely come back to this committee with feedback on the additional research that DAWA is going to do with the National Community Survey. The current plan, Councilmember Smith, is to come to a future agenda briefing just to give council an opportunity to provide feedback. I don't think there's a plan to bring this forward to full council at a council meeting, but just to get any other feedback on potential open-ended questions that we might want to consider prior to that August date that DAWA referenced, where we would want to have everything finalized so that then the survey can go out and we can have the data ready in time to inform the FY25 budget process. Do you think an agenda briefing is sufficient? I'm definitely interested in feedback from both Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Roney on getting that feedback from full council.
I think it can be a great opportunity as long as they have the information in advance.
Yeah.
I happen to think of one thing. We have this fairly new Office of Data, and I just wonder, are they eager to hear or to pursue any like data gaps? It's like, oh my gosh, we have a chance. Let's get some new information here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yes, they're very interested in this. It's a really exciting time. Again, strategic planning and performance management is a personal passion of mine, in addition to getting to work on it every day at work. And in addition to us having the National Community Survey, we're also relaunching our participation in the North Carolina benchmarking project. So this is a really exciting year where we're going to have benchmarking data from peer cities across the country, as well as some standardized information on what cities across the state of North Carolina are doing. So what I'm looking forward to is this time next year having really good benchmark data from cities that are similar to us in economic makeup, and then also cities that are operating under the same form of government and same statutory requirements that we have in North Carolina. So that's part of what the Office of Data and Performance is going to be looking at. Is we're going to have this great data set, and from there, I think this point next year we'll be able to say this is where we have gaps in our data, but right now this is going to be kind of a foundational year where we're going to getting ourselves back up to speed in terms of how we're benchmarking and comparing our data and our performance with our peer cities as well as with other cities across the state of North Carolina.
I just realized when you said that how helpful it would be for me if I hadn't been in this conversation and I was sitting in agenda briefing, if there was a way to present this to council that also included where the questions matched up with our strategic priorities.
Absolutely.
Like I know in the past, it's like, oh, we don't want to leave out climate and neighborhood resilience, or we don't want to leave out reparations. And it'd be really easy to see where we were missing our own priorities if we didn't see each one of our areas touched. So that might be a format way that would help council to make some quick decisions.
Sure. And we can, I think, start some of that conversation at the June 13th work session where you're going to be revisiting your strategic priority goals. I don't know how robust the piece around what specifically are we currently looking at in the North Carolina benchmarking project and comparing that to the data that's being collected by the National Community Survey. But I think it's something that we can start that conversation around. Here are areas where we're already collecting data, and then here are areas where we have specific projects, programs, and initiatives planned that are aligned with those priorities. And so I think we can start heading in that direction. I just don't know how specific we're going to be able to get at that work session, knowing that we're also wanting to get approval from council and some decisions made on what those final strategic priority goals are going to be for the upcoming fiscal year.
Well, this added to my understanding a lot on what seemed to be such a small agenda item. So thanks for helping me understand more and dig in a little bit.
Okay, Dawa, you can go into the neighborhood grants.
All right. This is one I'm really excited to bring to you all, both to share information and to, for the first time formally, I believe, introduce Ms. Christina Israel, who is our Community Engagement Manager. She oversees the small and mighty community engagement division within our team and oversees the work of our neighborhood services specialist. So please welcome Ms. Christina Israel. She's done an amazing job getting this program up and running. You're going to hear a lot about the evolution of it, and just appreciate your time and attention to this program. Christina.
Good afternoon, committee members. As Dawa just shared, I'm Christina Israel, and I serve as the Community Engagement Manager with our Communication and Public Engagement Department. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today and provide you this update on neighborhood matching grants. Next slide, please, Katie. So beginning with our key takeaways, neighborhood matching grants were initiated in 2021 and support the city's priority of neighborhood resilience. The program goals center on building capacity in Asheville's neighborhoods, removing barriers to civic participation, and strengthening community partnerships. Since 2021, 24 neighborhoods have applied for neighborhood matching grants, and of those applicants, 19 neighborhoods have been awarded grants. Those 19 neighborhoods have completed or are in the process of implementing 23 projects, totaling $96,360 in city-funded improvements. When we add in the matching contributions of neighborhoods, it brings that total up to $192,720 in community investments so far. We're currently accepting applications for round 3 of the grants, and 12 projects will be selected for this awards cycle. The deadline to apply is May 27th. And our approach to managing this grant program is to listen to the participants and to our staff and to use their feedback to continuously iterate and make improvements to the program. And we'll share some more about that here in a little while. Okay, next slide, please. Our goals for the program are centered on building capacity in neighborhoods. And while the grant money is definitely a component of that, what we've seen is that capacity also grows as neighbors build connections with one another. These grants are all about empowering neighborhoods to select the improvements that will make the biggest impact where they live. We're also creating new avenues for civic participation, and that happens through relationship building with city staff as we provide them technical assistance and support of their projects, as well as with the nonprofits and community partners who are supporting the neighborhood matching grants. Next slide, please. So some background on the program. Council established the neighborhood matching grants in 2021 with an initial allocation of $200,000 for fiscal year 22. The program was then allocated $75,000 in the FY23 budget. Neighborhoods can apply for grants of up to $5,000, which they pledge to match dollar for dollar with an equivalent amount of volunteer hours, cash, and/or in-kind donations. The grants are available to any neighborhood association within Asheville city limits. We do request that neighborhoods complete a registration form if they haven't already. And we also ask that they register with the city's vendor self-service portal, which is how we process their payments. We know that not all neighborhoods have a bank account or a tax ID number, and that's okay. We've seen several successful instances of neighborhood organizations partnering with local nonprofits to sponsor their grant as a fiscal agent. Once the projects have been selected for awards, the project representatives sign a partnership agreement with the city, which outlines everyone's roles and responsibilities and deadlines for payment and completion of the project. They can begin work after those agreements have been fully executed with signatures from all parties. The project coordinators can request a one-year term extension to their agreements if they're unable to complete the project within that one-year time frame. Next slide. So before we go through the list of projects, I think it's important to recognize how the program is impacting Asheville's neighborhoods. We've spoken with project leaders who shared that their neighborhoods were grateful to have a reason to come together and to work towards shared goals and to celebrate with one another after months or even years in isolation related to the pandemic. And while the grant program brings people together to work on their projects, it's also strengthening partnerships between neighbors, their city government, and local nonprofits. We recently heard, for example, from the Montford Neighborhood Association that they partnered with 9 local organizations on their grant, including with City Council on the Invasive Species Awareness Week proclamation. Next slide. So next, we're going to walk through the projects that have received grant awards. From the first funding cycle in fiscal year 22, 8 of those projects have been completed. Each of the projects addressed a specific need identified by neighbors and ranged from tree planting to festivals, community garden programming, and physical improvements in their neighborhood common spaces. Next slide. There are 5 remaining projects from the first grant round that are still in process, but they're all underway and nearing completion. Each of these projects share a common characteristic in that they all encountered complex elements that were unforeseen in their project proposals. So, for instance, Albemarle Park, Haw Creek, and Kenilworth Forest all required additional permitting and design support from entities outside of city staff, which added time and extra work for those project coordinators. The Altamont Apartments community room upgrades are nearing completion. However, management of that project changed hands after it was approved for funding, and that presented significant challenges to those new project coordinators. The Burton Street grant has received full payment. We're just awaiting the final report and receipts totaling their expenditures before we can close out their grant. Next slide. All of the projects that were awarded grants in the second round are still in process. Because there are 10 of those projects, I've broken those up between the next 2 slides. Most of the round 2 projects have been initiated, including the Beaver Dam Valley Informatics Project, the Kenilworth Forest Upper Park improvements, the Montford kudzu removal along the Reed Creek Greenway. Next slide. The Southside United Organizational Development Initiative, and the We Can NCDOT right-of-way beautification. 2 of the projects are supporting community events that will happen this summer. Those are the Shiloh Fun Day and East End Valley Street Community Heritage Festival. And several of the remaining projects took longer to get started because they were more complex and required separate land use agreements from the city. These projects are occurring in city-owned parks and include the Kenilworth Residents Association Invasive Species Control in Kenilworth and Seven Springs Parks, the Oakhurst Invasive Removal Project in the Mountainside Park, and the 9-hole disc golf course in Aston Park that's being installed by the South French Broad Neighborhood Association. Next slide. So here we're showing ways that we've promoted the program this year. We're very fortunate to have Meredith Friedheim, who's our neighborhood services specialist, working with community members in the field. And so she's promoting the grants at neighborhood meetings and distributing flyers around town for us. We've also been able to talk about the program at length on a recent episode of What's Up Asheville on WRES 100.7 FM and provided an update to the Neighborhood Advisory Committee at their April 24th meeting. We've also shared the opportunity with our neighborhood contacts lists via the biweekly neighborhood e-newsletter, city news release, and our social media accounts. Next slide. So we're fortunate here at the city to be part of an organization that really cares about continuous improvement in our service delivery. We've come a long way in the past year with this program and have been able to implement some key improvements that I'm excited to share with you. Overall, an informal audit of the policies and procedures revealed that we needed to provide applicants more clear and precise information, especially on points related to project eligibility, what types of organizations qualify for grants, and setting clear expectations for timeframes on our end. For the current grant cycle, we've really tried to focus on front-loading as much work to the application period as possible. For example, we can't execute their partnership agreement without a vendor ID number. Since there's no reason for neighborhoods to wait to register with vendor self-service, we decided to get that registration done as soon as possible, and it helps us to avoid delays later on. Same thing for figuring out any permits that would be required and getting technical assistance from our staff. A great improvement made by our colleague in finance was to allow every neighborhood to request funds in advance. We know that not everyone has the capacity to pay for their projects up front, so this creates a more accessible option for everybody. We made changes to the scoring rubric this year that tie in questions about sustainability and equity. This mirrors our project planning process that we use internally for the organizational work plan and aligns with our citywide goals as well. The two new improvements that I'm most excited about are the addition of an all projects dashboard, which is accessible to everyone via the program webpage, and I'll share more detail about that on the next slide. And lastly, I'm happy to announce that beginning January 1st of 2024, the neighborhood matching grants will move to a rolling application and funding cycle. This means that neighborhoods will be invited to apply at any point throughout the year for a matching grant. We think this will improve both the experience of neighbors as they organize their proposals and staff as we continue to manage the program. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot of the program dashboard. Scanning the QR code on the slide will take you directly to the dashboard where you can view all of the neighborhoods that applied in rounds 1 and 2. And we'll also add the round 3 applications after that period closes on May 27th. You can also access the dashboard and all of the policies and program FAQs on our website. The address is ashevillennc.gov/neighborhood-matching-grants. And next slide. Circling back to the key takeaways, I hope I've been able to deliver a comprehensive view of the grant program. I encourage anyone who's interested to visit the program webpage. Again, you can find that by just doing a Google search for Asheville Neighborhood Matching Grants. All the info I've covered in today's presentation is available for you to check out there. And next slide. Thanks so much for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Christina. Any questions from the committee?
Christina, thank you for this update. And also, I really appreciated the part about sharing some of the lessons learned as this program is new. I know there have been concerns from folks who maybe were working with another organization and some expectations. And I think it's really good for us as this program is new to kind of share really publicly what we're learning and how we're learning it. As I have considered what some communities like Greensboro and Durham are doing around participatory budgeting, I have had some curiosity if we might start looking at the cycles as a bigger picture to look at geographic equity. The best solution that I could give is if now that the county districts are drawn to include parts of the city, maybe that's an answer to kind of like look at part of it, north, south, east, west, central. Another thing is that if we have one neighborhood who's like super organized and so they're ready to apply for grants so quickly, we want to celebrate that organization of a neighborhood, but also I'm curious about our legacy neighborhoods and some of the neighborhoods that might not yet be fully recognized by the city. So I know there's going to be an opportunity to kind of look in the review mirror soon, but I wonder if what it might look like to start looking in advance, and if we could consider looking at some of those geographic outlines. If we move in this learning process to a rolling cycle, for example, is it possible that a neighborhood could apply twice in one cycle, one annual cycle?
So we haven't nailed down all of the policies yet, the changes that will happen to the program policy when we move to the rolling application cycle. I would think that we wouldn't want to award the same neighborhood twice in the same fiscal year. But we already have examples of neighborhoods that applied in round 1 and they were awarded, and they applied in round 2 and they're awarded. So we don't have anything that says you only get one or you only get however many grants. But that's definitely something that we'll have to solidify and make really plain for people. And just to go back to your question about geographic sort of disbursement of the grants and how cool it would be to see that on a map. I love that idea. And my first thought was, I think the simplest thing to do could be on the program dashboard. We could just add a column with those geographic areas like you mentioned, north, south, east, west, central, and just list them there. And that way we have sort of a snapshot of where the program is right now and the geographic disbursement of where the grants are, where people are applying and where people are being awarded the grants.
Because we kind of have that information loosely outlined when I think about the neighborhood advisory committee, or when we ask folks to self-identify when they apply for advisory board. So it might help us, instead of looking back and like, oh no, we really invested in this one area and we could have done some specific outreach to invite other neighborhoods to participate. I'm just imagining trying to chart a path forward instead of wishing we had when we look back in 5 years. So
Absolutely.
thank you for putting in those ideas.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you again. I think that's all we have for today. Katie, do we have anybody in the speaker queue?
Checking right now. No, we do not.
All right, everyone, and happy belated Mother's Day. All the mothers on the
Same
line.
to you.
All righty, I'll see you all next time.